In this video clip of George swimming, he is working at about his VO2 max intensity, so the kind of pace and effort that he feels he can sustain for about 400 meters. When you're working at this kind of intensity, you are going to see any flaws that exist in the stroke, so it's quite a good intensity to work at and work with a coach when you're doing video analysis, because it will highlight what starts to go wrong a little bit in the stroke when you're working harder. But back to George. When you look at George's stroke, there's some really cool elements to his stroke that absolutely explain how he is able to work so well in open water conditions. Actually raced in Iseo in Italy very recently. The conditions were warm, the water temperature was about 25, so it was a non-wetsuit swim, and the conditions in the lake were actually a little bit choppy. So George has got a really ballistic, powerful, high turnover stroke for a guy who's 6'2", and what we're seeing here is absolutely classically chopping straight into the front of the stroke, setting himself up for a really good catch and pull phase. George's kick has always been one of the weaker areas of his stroke, but working at this intensity, he has figured out how to generate a kick that actually adds a bit of propulsion to his stroke as well. As he comes off the wall now, we're going to have a look at some of those really nice qualities of his stroke. So as he is opening up for that first breath off of the wall, you can see him poised in a catch position, and as he rolls over into that element, you can see that elbow is ever so slightly popped out to the side, and the forearm is getting hold of some water, as well as those big shovel size hands that he's got. But this is what you're striving to do, and with the elbow popped out ever so slightly to the side like that, it enables most people to get over the front of the stroke, trying to keep the elbow higher than the wrist and the wrist higher than the fingertips. If you try and do that directly in front of your body, so if I just remove that annotation, if George was to attempt to try and keep that elbow there at that phase in the stroke, he would massively have to internally rotate at the shoulder, and it would be extremely uncomfortable and not a very powerful position for him. So the way that he is dealing with that, the way that he is succeeding in getting his forearm over the front of the stroke and then getting his hand as an extension of that paddle, is by popping his elbow out to the side slightly. We're just going to watch what happens on the other side as he breaks into the next stroke. Piercing straight in, avoiding fingertips rising back up to the surface and elbow dropping. At no moment in that left arm stroke was there an instance where the elbow was lower than the wrist or the wrist lower than the fingertips. Good to see. And here you can begin to see that classical position that we're all trying to achieve in the swimming, where you've got those components of wrist being slightly higher. I've messed up that annotation, but don't worry about it too much. As we nudge it forwards, forearm getting hold of the water very early in the stroke, pulling all the way through. Watch the shape of the hand as he pushes back through the water, palm of the hand facing backwards, all the way to the end of the stroke and then into the recovery. Taking a breath, piercing in, ever so slight dip of the elbow there, but he's getting straight into the stroke, so he's getting away with it a little bit. Forearm over the front of the stroke. There it is, beautiful shape to model in your own mind's eye when you're trying to emulate what George is doing. So the depth of that catch might take a few people aback. So he is piercing quite deep into the water, but in a forward trajectory, and in really rough, choppy conditions, he isn't going to have any difficulty in the waves or in the roll of the swell. So it is more of an open water stroke than a classical pool-based stroke. And there you go, you're seeing the same on both sides. And as you might be able to detect, so George is a para triathlete. There's a bit of asymmetry to the legs. That's where George's impairment lies. So one kick might be slightly more powerful than the other, but what he's really striving to achieve is keep those legs and feet and toes up and out of the way. That was the first priority in developing George's stroke, because he was a little bit lazy around that. But as time has passed by, we've got to the point where it is quite a rhythmical and productive kick, particularly working at this intensity.